By the time Ned's second point of view chapter takes place, quite a few things have happened in his personal life since his conversation with Robert in the crypts of Winterfell. His son Bran is in a coma after falling from a tower, his son Jon has volunteered to join the Night's Watch, and Ned himself has accepted Robert's offer to become the new Hand of the King. Like Ned 1, Ned's second point of view chapter also features a conversation with Robert Baratheon, but this time around, they really start to showcase the differences in their moral code, in what becomes more like a clash of ideals between the two old friends. In any case, the chapter begins with a summon from Robert early in the morning about an hour before dawn. There was a rider in the night, and the king has something important to address with his new hand. It's interesting that Robert was awake before the sun was up. He doesn't seem like the type to wake up early and set his responsibilities in order, so whatever it is that Robert wants to discuss is probably stressing him out. Furthermore, he would like to address the issue with Ned in private, so after Ned gets ready, they set off and ride south until they're miles away from the camp and a safe distance from the guards who were following them. It seems like Robert had been yearning for some type of adventure, and while going for a ride in the open country isn't exactly the same as riding into battle and smashing your enemies, it's still a welcome sight for him these days. However, a simple ride through the north isn't enough to satisfy Robert's appetite for pleasure, so he teases Ned by proposing that they set their duty behind in favor of hitting the road and finding women. While Robert is actually serious about leaving everything behind for the thrill of an adventure, Ned serves as his voice of reason by reminding him of their duty to the realm. Then things take a turn when Robert tries to recall the woman that Ned had an affair with, which isn't something that Ned is open about. Up to this point, the one stain on Ned's reputation is the fact that he fathered a bastard son. And although I think it's likely that Ned made that up to protect Jon from his real identity, it's common knowledge at this point, and he's embarrassed to even speak about it. So it comes as no surprise that when Robert tries to talk about it, Ned immediately gets defensive about this other woman that he may have had relations with. The name of the woman in question is Wylla. Wylla was a wet nurse for House Dane at their castle of Starfall, and for what it's worth, later on in A Storm of Swords, Edric Dane states that Wylla is indeed Jon Snow's real mother. With that said, Robert is completely open to the idea of meeting new women on the road, which is proof that he couldn't care less about honoring his marriage to Cersei. So while Ned is ashamed of his infidelity and committed to the responsibilities that come with his position, Robert welcomes the idea of Ned's biggest shame, and he's actively looking for a way to avoid his duty. In any case, once Robert feels safe enough to get down to business, he reveals that there's been a message from Lord Varys, his Master of Whispers. Varys has been using the exiled knight, Sir Jorah Mormon, to spy on Daenerys Targaryen, and at this point in the story, he's trying to work his way back into Westeros by earning a royal pardon. Jorah was once the head of House Mormont, until he was caught selling poachers to a Tyroshi slaver 5 years ago. Selling people into slavery is illegal in Westeros, so when Ned found out about his crime, he rode to Bear Island to deliver his sentence. However, by the time he arrived at the island, Jorah had already fled to the Free Cities. 5 years have passed, and Ned still hasn't forgiven Jorah for dishonoring the North. In contrast, Robert is not only willing to overlook Jorah's crimes, but he's also actively benefiting from his services, which sort of undermines Ned's commitment to law and order. Cause Ned doesn't just enforce the law, he lives under a strict code of honor, and he also holds everyone else to that same standard. So when Robert shows that he's willing to work with exiles, it implies that he's willing to overlook the law when it's convenient for him, which is the opposite of Ned's seemingly black and white judgment. At any rate, the breaking news coming from Jorah is that Daenerys Targaryen has married the Dothraki horse lord Khal Drogo, and Robert fears that their union might one day pose a threat to the realm, and his solution is to kill Daenerys, in hopes that it would prevent them from invading Westeros. But Ned simply can't stand for the murder of children, and Daenerys is a teenager, so he immediately argues against the idea of killing her, which is giving shades of their argument from 15 years ago, when Ned and Robert fought over the execution of Rhaegar's children, who were murdered in the aftermath of Robert's rebellion and used as a token of fealty by Tywin Lannister. Ned was not happy with how those children were handled, and he even accused Tywin of murder. On the contrary, Robert accepted Tywin's token of fealty and expressed no sympathy for the dead children, simply because of their bloodline. After their fight, only the death of Lyanna was able to bring them back together, but 15 years later, they're still standing on opposite sides of the same issue. But Ned isn't too aggressive to plead his case, because not even time has been able to cool off Robert's wrath. And while one can argue that Robert's feelings for Rhaegar are justified, it's hard to support his wish for the death of his entire family. And it turns out that Ned wasn't the only one who was willing to oppose Robert in the name of protecting children. Jon Arryn himself had prevented Robert from having his way with Daenerys and her brother Viserys. But now that he's gone, Robert is once again determined to have them both killed. Furthermore, Robert is also worried that there's other houses throughout the realm who would support House Targaryen should they ever come back to Westeros with a formidable army. Which is a valid point considering that the great houses of Martell and Tyrell, in addition to all of their vassals, all sided with the Loyalists during Robert's rebellion. And to make matters worse, Khal Drogo has 100,000 men in his army, which is enough to stress out over in of itself. In contrast, Ned doesn't have the same level of concern, and it's mainly because their army is on the other side of the Narrow Sea, and they don't have any ships to cross over to Westeros. Yet one can't help but think that his idea to ignore them is pretty careless, because if they ever find a way to make it across the Narrow Sea, it would cost them thousands of lives and perhaps even their own. But maybe Ned is actually speaking from a position of confidence, and maybe even a little arrogance, and that's because him and Robert have proven to be a powerful military force over the past 15 years, where they defeated House Targaryen during Robert's rebellion and also House Greyjoy in embarrassing fashion. Nevertheless, Ned is confident that they would be able to handle Khal Drogo's army once they name a new Warden of the East, which is a topic that they briefly spoke about in the Crypts of Winterfell. Back then, Ned had hoped that Robert would honor Jon Arryn's son with the title, as has always been the case with the Lords of the Vale. But Robert thought that he was too young and sickly to hold the title. But perhaps he already had someone in mind to assume the role at that point, because that's exactly what he tells Ned when Ned calls his bluff. And just as Ned feared, Robert has already promised the title to Jaime Lannister, the Kingslayer. However, he doesn't exactly portray a feeling of confidence behind that decision. In fact, he can't even look Ned in the eye when he tells him, which implies that he doesn't even have the conviction to defend himself. But maybe it wasn't entirely his decision in the first place. Perhaps it was even suggested by Cersei, because at the end of Bran 2, Cersei tells Jaime that she wanted him to be the new Hand of the King. But since that never came to pass, maybe she started plotting to grant her brother a different title. And my reasoning for this is that Jaime wouldn't willingly fight to give himself more responsibility. In fact, during that same chapter, he says so himself. In any case, Ned has a lot of issues with this, but the biggest one is that giving Jaime dominion over the East would put half of the military power in Westeros in the hands of House Lannister. And considering that this is coming after Ned and Catelyn read the contents of Lysa's letter, Ned has more than one reason to be wary of their house at this point. So he poses a question to Robert as to whether he can really trust Jaime, and Robert responds by stating that he has no reason to mistrust Jaime, as Jaime is a sworn member of the Kingsguard and brother to Queen Cersei. Ned counters by reminding Robert that Jaime was also sworn to protect King Aerys before he ended up killing him. However, Robert doesn't hold Jaime at fault for killing Aerys because someone had to do it. But there's something else that's been haunting Ned about the Lannisters that dates back to Robert's rebellion. After the Battle of the Trident, the remnants of the Targaryen army had retreated to the capital. Robert had taken a wound from Rhaegar, so he entrusted Ned to pursue what was left of their troops. When he got to King's Landing, he found that the city had already been sacked by Tywin Lannister. However, Ned took issue with how the city was taken and also the timing in which the Lannisters had finally decided to join their cause. The war had raged on for close to a year before Tywin decided to take action. So when he brought his army to the capital, Aerys thought that he had finally come to their aid, but he was betrayed as soon as he led him into the city. According to Ned, there was no honor in that conquest, and he's never been able to find peace with how everything went down. For the past 15 years, he's had to live with the fact that they won the war using treachery, and he might be feeling guilty by association. Of course, Ned had nothing to do with how the city was taken, but even though he would have done things a lot differently, he's not proud that his side threw away their honor towards the end of the war to secure their victory. At any rate, the one thing Robert wanted after the rebellion was Lyanna Stark, but he was left with a crown instead, which is tragic considering that the crown is seen as a symbol of wealth, fame, and abundance, but none of that has been able to make up for the death of Lyanna in Robert's eyes. which poses the question as to whether Robert would have lived a different life with Lyanna by his side, and I think it's hard to say for certain. But what type of man is Robert right now? Robert's a man that runs away from his responsibilities so that he can spend more time drinking, eating, and whoring his life away. He also cheats on his wife and condones the murder of children. Robert may not be evil per se, but he's definitely not a good man, and I don't think Lyanna would have been enough to transform him into a different person. There's one last thing that's been tormenting Ned about Jaime. That day when he arrived at King's Landing to find that the city had been sacked, he eventually rode into the throne room to find Jaime Lannister sitting on the Iron Throne surrounded by dozens of Lannister men. Ned didn't take this in lightly. As a matter of fact, he found it to be a definitive sign of disrespect, while Robert threw his head back and laughed as he was hearing this for the first time. This made Ned question everything, because it seems like Robert stands on the opposite side of every issue, so what purpose could Ned serve for a king that has always done what he wanted and will continue to do as he pleases? Ned rode south in light of receiving Lysa's letter, in part because he was convinced by his wife Catelyn and Maester Luwin that accepting Robert's offer was the wisest course of action if he wished to find the truth about Jon Arryn's death and prevent Robert from meeting the same fate. But in truth, he never wanted to ride south. He wanted to stay in Winterfell with Catelyn, where he could be with his family and continue to do his duty as the head of House Stark as he'd done for many years. And thus, he's left with a vast sense of helplessness as he's bound by duty to follow this king who disagrees with him on everything. And for the most part, this is a theme that follows Ned throughout his character arc, as he'll often find himself to be the only one bound by honor in a kingdom that's rotting from corruption and personal gain. In the next chapter, Ned will get a taste of what that looks like when his daughters are summoned before the king to explain themselves over something that happened between them and Prince Joffrey. But that's it for me. Please leave a like if you enjoyed the video, leave your thoughts in the comment section below, and subscribe for more content like this. Peace.